Well, good morning. Welcome to Boston, Massachusetts. We're here at Freedom Trail. It's a 2.5-mile journey, 16 historical liberty sites, freedom sites, and the founding of our great nation, beginning here at the Boston Common Park, the oldest park in America, right here on our right. And just join. This is going to be a great experience today to walk with us through history here in Boston, Massachusetts. Our next stop will be at the State Capitol House, and we'll be at the old South Meeting House, the State House, where the Boston Tea Party began, many of these events. So join us on an exciting journey through history. This is our first stop here, the Massachusetts State House. It's actually the capital of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You can see it right here on our first stop here on the 16 sites of liberty. Massachusetts State House here, right across from the park, our first stop on the Trail of Freedom here in Boston, Mass.
The Massachusetts State House was completed on January 11, 1798, and is widely acclaimed as one of the most significant and magnificent public buildings in the country. The land for the State House was originally used as John Hancock's cow pasture. The most distinct feature, the Golden Dome, was once made of wood, but was later overlaid with copper by Paul Revere. It was covered in 23-karat gold leaf for the first time in 1874 and was painted gray during World War II to protect the city from bombing attacks.
Join us on this historic stop here on the Liberty Trail, the Freedom Trail, Park Street Church, a beautiful church.
The Park Street Church was founded in 1809. The 217-foot steeple of Park Street Church was one of the first landmarks travelers saw when approaching Boston. Author Henry James called the building the most interesting mass of bricks and mortar in America. Park Street Church's lofty architecture reflects even a loftier mission of human rights. Park Street Church became known for supporting abolitionist causes, where on July 4, 1829, a young William Lloyd Garrison delivered his first major public speech against slavery. The Park Street Church site was formerly called Brimstone Corner, and it may have gotten that nickname during the War of 1812 when the Congressionalists stored brimstone, a component of gunpowder, in the basement. Or perhaps it was because the old-school Congressionalist ministers preached many hellfire and brimstone sermons here. Park Street Church continues to hold weekly religious services today.
Church actually hosted the debut of a great song, Our Country, 'Tis of Thee, right here. The first time it was done in the United States, right here, that great song. We're at the Granary Burying Ground here. Many Revolutionary War heroes are buried here, including the 5 that were killed in the Boston Massacre. John Adams, Paul Revere. There's a statue here it's dedicated to the Franklin family, Ben Franklin, although he's not buried here. This great place right here in Boston, Mass. Around here on the Liberty Trail, we have 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence are also buried here. Great statesman and signer of the Declaration of Independence, John Hancock, is also buried here at the Granary.
Established in 1660, some of America's most notable citizens rest here. Named for the 12,000 bushel grain storage building that was once next door, the historic cemetery has 2,300 markers. However, there is a discrepancy between the number of headstones and the number of people buried in the granary. It is estimated that there are over 5,000 Bostonians who have made the granary their final resting place. At one time, the granary was part of Boston Common, and the livestock that grazed the common handled the landscaping at the burial ground as well. During the Victorian era, the headstones were reorganized into neat rows to make way for a modern innovation of the time, the lawnmower. In 1688, the royal governor directed that King's Chapel be built on a town burying ground when no one in the city would sell the congregation desirable land on which to build a non-Puritan church. This structure was a small wooden chapel used by a small but growing Anglican community in Boston. By 1749, the building was too small for the congregation, which had grown to include a number of prominent merchants and their families. The present granite structure was built around the original wooden chapel, which was then removed through the windows of the new construction and rebuilt as an Anglican chapel in Nova Scotia.
America's first architect, Peter Harrison, noted architect, built this church. That's a pulpit you'd like to preach in right there.
And before the Revolution, this was actually the first Church of England under the English government, and after the Revolution, it became a Unitarian church. King's Chapel Burying Ground is a fascinating historic cemetery. It is located directly next door to King's Chapel. King's Chapel Burying Ground was Boston proper's first burying ground. It boasts a multitude of famous residents, including John Winthrop, Massachusetts' first governor, and the first woman to step off the Mayflower. The Benjamin Franklin statue and Boston Latin School are the next stop on the Freedom Trail. The Boston Latin School was founded on April 23, 1635, and is the oldest public school in America. Ben Franklin currently marks the School Street location of the original schoolhouse. 4 signers of the Declaration of Independence attended Boston Latin: Franklin, Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Robert Payne. Of the 4, only 3 graduated. Ben Franklin, though one of America's greatest minds, is also one of its most notable dropouts. The next stop on the Freedom Trail is the Old Corner Bookstore. The Old Corner Bookstore was built in 1718 and once belonged to Puritan dissident Anne Hutchinson. The Old Bookstore was the center of American book publishing. From this place, publishers produced the works of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Louisa May Alcott, and many more. Many of these great people also visited the building. Scheduled to be demolished for a parking garage in 1960, Bostonians rallied to buy the property and restore it. Historic Boston, Inc. currently owns the building.
Oh, wow. we are at the old South Meeting House, actually the organizing point for the Boston Tea Party, and several notable events here. One that comes to mind, of course, is Ben Franklin. Let me just read to you what Ben Franklin said. A lot of people say that he was a deist, and I'm not here to argue that point, but let's read what Ben Franklin said, and was recorded. He said, "I've lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid?" Now, I'm not here to debate that issue, whether he was a deist or not, hundreds of years later, but think of that statement. How can a man say that God governs in the affairs of men, controls the destiny, guides the affairs of men, being a deist? That's a contradiction. So again, we're not here to make that claim either way, but the evidence of what he said at this place right here, where he was baptized, at the Old South Meeting Hall. Also, this was the organizing point for what famously known the Boston Tea Party. Actually began at this church, and the momentum from this place went forward, where they would not put up with the infuriating taxes that they were imposing upon the people. The town-set taxes that were a heavy burden upon the people of America. This was the beginning of the revolt against the imposition of huge taxes that our founders would not stand for. And the Boston Tea Party actually began right here. That momentum started in the church, right here.
Built in 1729, the Old South Meeting House was a place for Puritans to meet and worship. The Old South Meeting House was the biggest building in all of colonial Boston and the stage for some of the most dramatic events leading up to the American Revolution, including the meeting that occurred on December 16, 1773, where over 300 tons of taxable tea sat in the holds of 3 ships. If the tea was unloaded, a tax would have to be paid to England, and people did not want to pay that tea tax. 5,000 colonists crowded into Old South Meeting House to decide what was to be done with the tea. After the failure of the final attempt to have the tea sent back to England, Samuel Adams addressed the crowd saying, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." These words were rumored to be a secret signal to the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Mohawk Indians, to march down to Griffin's Wharf and destroy 340 crates of tea, dumping them into the harbor. This famous event became known as the Boston Tea Party.
It was in March 5th, 1770. And 5 men were murdered here on this site by the British, the beginning of what was known as the Boston Massacre. Here we have the building to show the location. It's something that's happened that has gone down in infamy in the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Within these walls of the old State House that John Adams, Samuel Adams, John Hancock, they debated the future of the American Republic, the idea of a free market, the free enterprise system. That whole concept of self-government began here at the old State House on the Liberty Trail.
The next stop on the Freedom Trail is often referred to as the home of free speech and the cradle of liberty. This beautiful building hosted America's first town meeting. The hall's vital role in the revolutionary politics had not been a part of its original plans, but it became home to an intricate collection of events that shaped the nation's history. It was at this hall that Americans first protested against the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act, setting the doctrine that would come to be known as no taxation without representation. Gatherings to protest the Townstead Acts, the Redcoat occupation, and the Tea Act would follow. The hall served as a meeting place and marketplace for more than 270 years and has continued to provide a forum for debate on the most consequential issues of the day. The next stop on the Freedom Trail is Paul Revere's house. Built in 1680, the Paul Revere House is the oldest remaining structure in downtown Boston and the only home on the Freedom Trail. Paul Revere purchased the former merchant's dwelling in 1770 when he was 35 years old. He and his family lived here when Revere made his famous messenger ride to Lexington on the night of April 18th and 19th, 1775. That would be immortalized by Longfellow's famous poem, Paul Revere's Ride. Throughout the 19th century, the home served as a boarding house for sailors and tenement for Irish, Jewish, and Italian immigrants.
Oh, sorry. I was just framing. Just getting ready.
Here we are at the site of the Old North Church, the famous church where Paul Revere gave 2 lanterns to 3 men to go up in that tower up there to warn the militia that the British were coming across the Charles River. And it was here that we hear the old saying, "One if by land, 2 if by sea." Of course, that has been phrased down throughout history. And here we have the Old North Church, the beginning of this that preceded the battles of Lexington, Concord, and the American Revolution itself. The midnight ride of Paul Revere began right here, where he went out and warned in the countryside with some other riders, Mr. Dawes. They went out and warned the militia that the British were coming. And if you ever walk through these streets here at Boston, you can see why the British didn't want to give this up. It's so beautiful. They wanted to keep control of it, and it was a British-occupied Boston at the time. But the American spirit of liberty lived on and fought, and this was the beginning of it. They would not give up our land to the British. These lanterns were were hung up there just for a minute, long enough for our militia to see the warning, but not too long for the British to find out about the message. The great ride of Paul Revere began right here as he told the men to hang 2 lanterns up in this steeple right up here to warn the militia that the British were coming by sea over the Charles River. There it is. There's the replica. That is actually it. It's been fixed over time, but that's the steeple where the lanterns were hung to warn the Americans that the British were coming over the river. This was a British-occupied Boston at the time. The American spirit would not give in. This was American property, and liberty was fought. The line for liberty was fought right here. This was the beginning of the battle. Of course, later would be the Battle of Concord and Lexington and the American Revolution. This was the very beginning of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. This steeple was the highest point in the city, actually the highest ground in the city, and people didn't have lights on at night, so when the lantern was lit up there, it was at the highest point, and also it was totally dark around it, so it could be seen very well.
On April 18, 1775, Paul Revere met up with Robert Newman to tell him how to signal the advancement of British troops towards Lexington and Concord. Newman then met with fellow Sons of Liberty Captain Pulling and Thomas Bernard, leaving Bernard to keep watch outside. Newman opened the church, and he and Pulling climbed the stairs and the ladders up 8 stories to hang 2 lanterns for a few moments. It was long enough for the Patriots in Charlestown to learn what was being immortalized by the phrase, "One if by land, 2 if by sea," in Longfellow's poem. The British were advancing by boat across the Charles River. The famous Old North Church steeple has been blown down twice by hurricanes, once in 1804 and once in 1954. The Old North Church is still an active Episcopal congregation today. The next stop on the Freedom Trail is the Burying Ground. Named after shoemaker William Copp, Copp's Hill Burying Ground is the final resting place and cemetery of merchants, artists, and craftspeople who lived in the North End. Located on a hill on which a windmill once stood, the land was given to the town. Copp's Hill was Boston's largest colonial burying ground, dating back from 1659. The burying ground holds the Old North Church sexton Robert Newman, the man who hung the lanterns on the night of Paul Revere's midnight ride, and Edmund Hart, builder of the USS Constitution. Countless free African Americans are buried in Potter's Field on the Carter Street side of the site. Because of its height and panoramic views, the British used this vantage point to train their cannons on Charlestown during the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775. The grave of Captain Daniel Malcolm's tombstone at Copp's Hill is riddled with the marks of vengeful British bullets. The next stop on the Freedom Trail is Bunker Hill. The Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775, was the first major battle of the Revolutionary War and predicted the character and outcome of the rest of the war. It took a force of 3,000 redcoats to dislodge the colonial militia from a hastily constructed redoubt atop Breed's Hill in Charleston. It was at this battle that "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes" is said to have been uttered by William Prescott, and has come to immortalize the determination of the ill-equipped colonists. While technically a British victory, the Battle of Bunker Hill proved that colonial forces could fight effectively against the British. The cornerstone of the monument at Bunker Hill was laid in 1825 by a Revolutionary War hero, Lafayette, on the 50th anniversary of the battle. The 221-foot granite monument would not be finished until 1842.
Welcome to the USS Constitution. This ship was commissioned and named by George Washington in honor of our Constitution. This has a great name from public adoration called Old Ironsides. This ship defeated 5 British ships in battle and several merchant ships, and won her acclaim by the public for in getting that name, Old Ironsides. So this ship here was commissioned by our first President of the United States, George Washington, and there it is, the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides. Very few ships have that kind of adoration.